So let's go with our panellists right now, and I'll invite them to come up one by one as I introduce them. I'd like you to please welcome Kate Fielding, Chief Executive Officer of A New Approach. Please welcome Kate. Kate is the CEO. It's Australia's leading think tank focused on arts, and I'll get you to sit at the end, Kate, if that's okay. Kate, I'll go that far, if that's all right. Beautiful. And so A New Approach incepted in 2018, drawing together a unique alliance of people across the country in governance, also advisory staffing roles to create a foundation on which the ANA could grow and thrive. Our next guest is Talia Azaria, Executive Director of Young Mayors. I love this. Please welcome Talia. Thank you. I'll get you to sit next to Kate. Amazing, the Executive Director of Young Mayors. We heard about this yesterday as well from the Governor-General. Talia oversees the pilot of Scale Up across the country of the Young Mayors model, an initiative to empower young people through decision-making and leadership. Talia has worked in the youth media, arts and not-for-profit sectors, and 15 years in senior leadership roles at institutions including SYN Media, Circus Oz, what an amazing role you had there, and a number of other places as well. Ingrid Stonhill is our next guest. Please welcome Ingrid. Ingrid is Katherine Town Council's first female Chief Executive Officer in its 44-year history. I had a wonderful conversation with Ingrid just before we started. I worked at Hot 100 in Darwin, just up the road from Katherine, of course. Ingrid has advocated for and worked for diverse not-for-profits, where she led a whole of business structural change and redesigned management processes to transform underperforming organisations into high-performing social enterprises. She was born and raised in the city, but loves living in the regional area now. So thank you, Ingrid. Rebecca McKenzie is our next guest. Please welcome Rebecca. Chief Executive Officer of the Glen Ira City Council in Victoria, responsible for a $190 million business portfolio which delivers more than 120 services to the Glen Ira community. Rebecca has an extensive background in qualifications in HR and public sector leadership. Rebecca, welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, and certainly not least though, Professor Valerie Coombs, Director, Centre for Aboriginal Economic Policy Research. Please welcome Valerie. Professor Coombs is a Quandamooka woman with many years' experience working in Indigenous affairs with the Australian Department of Aboriginal Affairs, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, the then Department of Education, Employment and Training, as well as Social Security, delivering services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. More recently, Valerie was the CEO of the Queensland South Representative Body, Aboriginal Corporate and Queensland South Native Title Services, as well as a member of the National Native Title Tribunal. Professor Coombs is currently the chair of the Quandamooka Yali Buraba, Deputy Chair, Aboriginal Hostels Limited, and also Chair of the Aboriginal and Isla Independent School in Brisbane for 5 years, and set up the Wodja Wodja High School in the Wurrumba Aboriginal community. Please welcome Valerie once again. Okay, so Valerie, let's start with you. Nice open-ended question for you. You'll be on as you start talking. So, what was the big takeaway, the thing that sort of popped out for you in Simon's presentation as we watched away?
Oh, I think the major thing is when governments make announcements. Governments really are about getting re-elected and averting criticism. They're really not about fixing things to the way that they need to be fixed. So I think that message came loud and clear, and also the intricacies associated with remote First Nations people living in remote areas, which brings me to the issue of the renewable energy transformation that we're looking at. Government focusing on the areas where the most emissions are, but sadly remote areas are going to be left behind. So what we want to do as First Nations people is say we missed out on the post-war reconstruction, with Nugget Coombs is actually related to me, believe it or not, where everybody that sits around probably owned a home because of that. Well, as First Nations people, we missed out. And we want to ensure that with the renewable energy, that's not another opportunity where Australia leaves us behind. So we really need that renewable energy in First Nations communities.
Rebecca, what popped for you?
Well, I was thinking about some of the challenges associated with sort of the workforce and the future workforce, and I wasn't certain whether I needed to be excited or scared and petrified about what the future of that sort of started to look like. But, and I think Simon was touching on the fact that we've got both issues to do with supply as well as issues to do with demand, and how, as local government leaders, we might make some of those decisions about how we can influence that. And you know, it really starts to lead us to thinking about, well, if we're going to have particular workforce challenges in particular parts of our workforce, if they're discretionary services, are they services that we actually choose to continue to run? And what are some of the consequences for that if we then start making decisions not to run services where they're potentially impacting the most vulnerable in our community? So I think it's a really big challenge, and we need to think about how we make decisions now so that we're actually preparing ourselves for what that future might look like.
And Valerie, how about for you in the regional area?
So actually, Simon, congratulations. I was on this emotional roller coaster as you spoke. I went to the depths of despair, you know, coming from a regional NT council, and I think we've got all those regional issues on steroids, to feeling, you know, excited and laughing like you. Excellent description of Gen X, so thank you for that. And it just really made me reflect on how the fact that local government is still that gem that is undersold. It's still that jewel in the crown, and where you get the most reward. And I really wanted to start thinking about how we can both, or all of us as a sector, really capture that in the work that we can do to communicate what we can do so well to attract those people in. So thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Lovely.
Talia, how about you?
Yeah, similar to some of the comments that have already been made, my biggest reflection was on the workforce and the pipeline of young people that's just not there. So the stat of 29% of our local government jobs being held by over 55s means that there's a whole chunk of the workforce that is not being represented by young people. And we know that it's actually more than just jobs in local communities. It's actually about nurturing the community itself. And Gen X are not disengaged, as we often will hear. Media commentary will make us believe that they are disengaged, but they are chronically disempowered. And if we're creating the opportunities in local government for those pathways for young people to have those jobs, it means better outcomes for the communities themselves, because they will be facing unprecedented challenges as time goes on. And they will be the ones that lead the community forward. So we need to do more to be engaging them now, so that they see themselves in those communities and actually want to take those jobs.
As a leader in the younger set, are demographics something that you look at more probably than you think older people do?
Well, look, the first thing that I should say is that I'm a millennial. I'm not actually a Gen X, so I'm not going to speak for Gen Xers. But we know in our work at the Foundation for Young Australians, for example, that 30 years ago people would have 4 jobs in their lifetime, but now young people often have 16 jobs in their lifetime. And so they're in a more unstable workforce, and yet they also can't afford to buy a house in the way that baby boomers could. I'm the child of a baby boomer. At the time that my parents bought a house, it cost 4 times their annual income, and now costs 16 times the annual income. So all of those things play in when we think about young people staying in communities, and we know that they stay home longer. In Mackay, for example, the Young Mayors program operates there with the Mackay Youth Council as part of the Mackay Regional Council. And we know that the young people are there, and they are a captive audience because they can't afford to leave. And so what are we doing to hold them in the community, to give them the space to be part of the decisions that impact their lives, because they want to be, because they tell us time and time again they want to have a say in the issues that affect them, because they will be the ones who move that community forward, and all communities across this continent.
And so, Kate, through the lens of arts and culture, what resonated for you?
So I'm going to respond to the message about the walkable spaces and get everyone to stand up, please, including on there. I know, if you're like me and you're not great at sitting for ages, this is your time to have a bit of a wiggle. So, excellent, thank you so much. So, from your presentation today, sit down if you're worried about productivity. So you can sit down if you're worried about workforce productivity. Sit down if you're worried about isolation in your community and mental health within your community, particularly amongst young people. Sit down if you're worried about how are we going to deal with the fracturing in our community, the polarisation in our community, so those social cohesion issues. If you're worried about that, you can sit down.
Better sit down, I suppose.
And if you're worried about intergenerational connections, so connections across the generations, those generations that we heard today, if you're worried about how they're going to get along with each other, you can sit down. Great, so everyone who's left standing, you can tune out, you can ignore the arts and culture person because it's got nothing to do with you. But if you're worried about any of those issues, then arts and culture, the evidence shows us, you can see my Gen X background, evidence, data, what's in it for you, the features. The evidence shows us that arts and culture contributes to addressing these really big public policy issues that come out of our demographics and that they can do it in a cost-effective way. That's what came out of it from me.
Wonderful. Love the interaction as well. Okay, Simon, so I've had 5 sort of reviews, if you like, of your presentation. What do you take away from what you've heard on stage here?
Well, the reason I'm pointing out challenges is always, this is not inevitable. Right? You can always be the master of your own destiny, and this is true for you as an individual as it is true for us as a collective, be this a local government, be this a national government. We need to do stuff, and we need to very much encourage young people to have a goal. It's one of those things that always strikes me when I read history about the 40s or the 50s in particular. You go like, oh, the CIA director's like, the guy's 33. It's all these things. You have those crazy leaders who are young, and you need to tap people on the shoulder. You need to hand over power and decision-making, just influence to young people, and things will be fine. And then you get them on board. If you complain about people being disengaged, it's easy. But also, what kind of story are we telling? What public narrative are we talking about politicians? It's one of those things that actually always bothers me, and I've been a bit guilty here today. It's so easy to be cynical. And you go, this way, we only encourage that we minimize the pool of people that considers a career in public service. That's all that is. And that's not a smart thing collectively. So collectively, we want to very much always show what kind of leverage you have. And in local government, you want to show this. And there is much more leverage in local government than you just think about initially. People don't understand local government. So therefore, that's what I mean with the proactive approach. So I'm sorry for all the HR people in local government, because their job got more involved. And that's what you got to do.
And so, Kate, in the context of your work, and you sort of touched on it there, what does the demographic breakdown look like in arts and culture?
So we have done a national focus group study with middle Australians. So this is folks in outer suburban and regional remote locations. These are not people who work in arts and culture. These are low and middle income households. And they are, for all of you who are elected, these are swing voters. So these are the people who have swung their votes at federal and state and territory level more than once at both levels. So a very specific cohort. So what we know from those demographics, and from doing some 3 generational cuts of that data, we know that across those 3 generations, Middle Australia sees arts and culture as one of the key connectors in a community, and really important for local government. They want to be able to access arts and cultural experiences in their local community that provide opportunities to bring community together. So we're talking festivals, we're talking the libraries that we heard so much about yesterday. They see these as really essential places where they connect across generations and across different community groups. We know from the international evidence that there are many activities that bring communities together. And, you know, having lived and worked most of my life in regional and remote Australia, we know that sporting groups, sporting activities, they're a really key part of that community cohesion. But we also know from the evidence from the data that arts and cultural activities, your festivals, I'm a fan of the Mullet Festival, the hare, not the fish. These types of community activities bring together groups who otherwise would not be in the same place. There's really good data on this. So for you as local government who provide 24% of cultural funding in this country, and that's everything. I'm not just talking opera, I'm talking festivals, I'm talking galleries, I'm talking libraries, I'm talking screen, I'm talking gaming, I'm talking museums. You provide 24% of cultural funding in this country. We know from the Middle Australia work that that cohort see and understand what you do in this space more than any other level of government. You have a responsibility, but you also have a huge community relations win when you foster those kinds of activities right across those demographics.
Ingrid and Rebecca, you're both here representing council. Is arts and culture, is that a hard sell in your LGAs?
Did you want to start?
Sure. Well, not really, because it's something that is part of being in a remote community. It's something that we incorporate all the time into bringing people together. So it's that wonderful aspect of why I want to stay out in the regions. But interesting points in the sense that if I just talk about our own example, where we have these, some of the highlights that you talked about the workforce. We've got a medium age of 32. We've got a really transient community, but that's probably because we're right next to a rather large Air Force base. We've got people that have lived in the community and own the community very much. I'm sure my other CEOs out there will relate to the fact that it's a hard job managing expectations that are present, as well as trying to plan for the future. And also with the council, we have such incredible legislation that we have to follow. Again, that's a big portion of my concern of how we work. But one of the first things that we did was actually figure out how to engage with our community and how to get them to actually understand what it is that local government does. And I think if I focus back to that trust issue that we've been talking about and how we are the most trusted government sector, what we did was try to appeal across all those generations in a way that we could start telling people what it is that we do. Because I was just shocked about how many people don't understand in regional and possibly remote communities that have got no idea that council is responsible for all those events and a lot of other things that happen. And so I'm unashamedly going to talk about, if I may just very quickly, you'll find Orbs in the business lounge out there. They transformed our understanding with our community about what council did. We went from having maybe 80 people download our municipal plan, which does highlight where our budget will be spent, and people didn't know how much we participate in those events and community engagement programs, and they transformed our community understanding around what we do and what we can achieve. So by a simple visual tool. So I would really encourage you, if you want to make a difference into how you engage with your community, it absolutely, from a CEO perspective, took away, I would say, 90% of my negative complaints back into council about what we didn't do. Because in actual fact, it was just that they didn't know what it was that we did.
And no, not a hard sell in our community. And I think, going to your point, it's very much about people understanding that local government is so much more than just roads, rates and rubbish and the rhetoric of that. And, you know, 93% of the population in Glen Iris say that they have a good to a very good quality of life living there. And we recognise that creating that quality of life is a sort of complex mash of all of the different types of services and activities that council provides. And we know that if we invest in ways that bring the community together, that creates connections, that enables them to meet their neighbours, have conversations on the street, feel safe, then that actually builds a level of resilience. And if we have a resilient community, they can then bounce back from trauma. So we found, even through COVID, for example, you know, the biggest shock to kind of impact our society, really our community was able to bounce back quite quickly because I think they had those connections that we'd invested in the social infrastructure, not just the hard, hard infrastructure, that to help that community come together and operate most effectively.
And if I could just pick up on that, there's really good evidence that people-to-people links is one of the best predictors of both survivability and recovery from natural disasters. And I know I've been here the last few days, I've heard repeatedly how much people in this room are on the front line in terms of responding and recovering to those natural disasters. And I've heard again and again the need for the preemptive work. Building those person-to-person connections is absolutely critical.
And Valerie, in the context of your work that you're doing, we're dealing with really, really remote communities, but also, city Indigenous populations as well. How does demographics work for you in your space?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that. I live in the Brisbane City Council area, postcode 4178, which is Wynnum. And interestingly, I bought that house. I paid for that house. I worked hard to pay for that house. But I had to purchase the land that was actually stolen off my family in the first place, so I had to sort of buy it back, which is really interesting. So, park that. Then we masters of our own destiny. We applied for native title on Quandamooka country, which is North Stradbroke Island, Minjerribah, the first island that we applied. So we became masters of our own destiny. And I remember at the time the Premier of Queensland said, "But Valerie, you know, we're really worried because Stradbroke Island is so close to Brisbane." I said, "Premier, we're concerned too. We're worried that Brisbane's so close to our traditional land, but we were here first." And he's all like, "Oh, what could he do?" So it was kind of like groundbreaking that we succeeded in having the state accept our levels of connection because we hadn't been forcibly removed. They actually brought a benevolent asylum to North Stradbroke Island after post-convict transportation, so they needed us as a source of cheap labour. So we weren't forcibly removed, so we had the continuity of connection. We met all the incredible requirements that are stipulated by the Native Title Act, which was passed in 1993, and we got native title. So to see us as masters of our own destiny, the state government said, "Oh, we've got a meeting of concerned citizens." And my cousin and I said, "Oh, we'll come." And the state government said, "No, you don't have to come." And I said, "We'll come, we'll come." And we wanted to see what people are actually saying. And they said, "Does that mean we can't walk our dogs on the beach?" There's so much misinformation about what native title actually is. And I said to my cousin, "I hope they don't think we're going to start to eat their dogs on the beach." We had no idea what the concerns were, but if you talk to somebody now on North Stradbroke Island, they'll say, "Well, nothing really changed for them." But what changed for us was huge. So you have to set up what's called a registered native title body corporate that holds the native title on behalf of a whole claim group of people, which is unique governance in terms of Australian people. But it's also like a local government authority without a rate base, because no one funds registered native title bodies corporate. So we have to go out and get our own money. So we end up with a joint managed national park. And when you talk about language and culture, we have our own language. We put dual signage. And out at Point Lookout, which is an extremely 40, all these north-facing beaches where everyone wants to live. And James Cook called it Point Lookout because of all the rocks, and our traditional word for it is Moolumba, which is place of many rocks, so we thought that's ironic. We'll put up dual signage. Those people out there cut that sign down 3 times and threw it into the ocean. So we thought, well, we need to do something better. We put the signs up for the Joint Managed National Park, Nari Badjangjara. So slowly but carefully that culture's come in. But come August, the Quandamika Festival, it'll rock. 30th and 31st of August, so we have to do these things to bring people together. But the emergence of more registered native title body corporates across the country as people gain the right. And native title isn't about land rights, it's about challenging what right anybody had to take that land off you in the first place. That's what native title does. And it's an intricately complex space, but they are all like local government authorities. So I think we need to look and focus on that economy, particularly for our younger people, because our people, we had a mining industry for 70 years. We had young men who lived in a house where no man had worked for 4 generations. So, and now those households have 4 or 5 people in the one household working. So we had to generate income and ways of making money. So you talk about the economics, it's been really complex, but rewarding. So we got native title first claim across Minjuraba in 2000, today actually, 2011, so we've had native title. Then we got across Magumpin, which is the Island North, which is Moreton Island. And we've currently got a claim on the mainland. So I don't know if there's anybody here from Redland City Council, but I'll just finish with this. When you go through the native title process, the state accepts your level of connection. You have to prove that you do today what you were doing 60,000 years ago, okay? You might do it in a different form, but you're still doing that. Your kinship systems, your language, your culture, all that type of stuff. The state accepted our connection. People gain votes from opposing native title because people get scared or they think we're going to take over, or we're going to eat their dogs, or they can't go to the beach, or they can't enjoy the land. None of that's happened, by the way. And so the local government authority has challenged our native title, couldn't get funding from the federal government, because the federal government said, well, the state's accepted the connection, so we're not going to give you any money. And then wrote to the ratepayers and told them that the nasty Quandamooka people won't withdraw the claim, so your rates are going to have to go up. So that's the reality of today. So what we want everybody to do is don't panic about native title. You will not lose anything. We have everything to gain. It's a fantastic thing to do. And there's going to be more of it. It's not going to go away.
Amazing insights. Thank you. Ingrid, as we went through Simon's presentation, was there anything that didn't resonate with you as a younger person and representing younger people?
Are you asking me? Sorry, Talia.
Sorry, Talia. Sorry, my mistake.
Sorry.
No.
Answer the question.
I'm young.
You're all young. Come on.
Anything that didn't resonate? That's a good question, because it sort of all resonated, to be honest. It was really fascinating to hear all of the different points, but I suppose to pick up on the sense of that people don't understand local government. That rings true very much also for young people, but we know that young people will interact with local government as the first tier of government, because it is, right there for them. It's the library that they go and spend their time in. It's perhaps the local gallery, the swimming pool. And so similar also to what Valerie was talking about around native title and the responsibility to be educating people on what native title actually is and what local government actually is. The work that we're doing with the Young Mayors program is about introducing young people to those concepts at that very early age, between the ages of 11 and 17, before they have the legal right to vote, before they are entering the workforce, so that they can go into the workforce educated to understand what country they live on. So for example, with our youth councils, when they're inducted, they do a walk on country. They meet traditional owners so that they can understand where they are and what that means. They learn about power. Simon, you were talking about shifting power and how important that is. And we do a whole workshop with them on what it means to have power, what it means to share power, to notice who's not in the room and what it means to be a representative of your community, to have the mandate from the other young people in the community who have democratically elected you to represent them to your local government, local council, to understand what it means to bring their issues to the table and not just be there to represent yourself. So that doesn't really answer the question of what...
But you got to do all of this early on.
Yes.
When you have a captive audience, because when we talk about stuff like, I want to educate the public about how our government actually works, that is difficult because you're competing against all the cool shows on Netflix and all the video games and all the whatever. People are overworked. This is a hardcore attention economy. If anyone is willing to listen to you for a couple of minutes, this is a massive gift. So it can't be taken as a given that people listen to you. And in a sense, as long as you're in school, you're a bit of a captive audience. So you want to very much get your school classes through local council a couple of times. Tell them this is how this works. Have school representatives presenting their concerns to you guys or to the council, whatever it is. You need to proactively get those guys and gals through your doors and show them what's out there. If you think of your young kids, you ask them, what's your favorite job? What do you want to be? They say the 4 jobs that they know of. Yeah? And that's it. Like, I didn't, as a 4-year-old, go like, I want to be a demographer. I didn't say this as a 30-year-old, I learned this later. So that's something that you need to push in a very proactive sense.
That's right. And civics education actually in this country just teaches history more than it actually teaches how to participate in your community. And we know the best way to teach young people how to participate is through experiential activities. So similar to arts and culture, actually get out there and be part of it. And so the youth councils are doing exactly that. It's actually about centering young people in those processes to myth bust. What does local government do? How can you participate? And so once you then turn 18, you know what it means to hold a ballot paper, to go into a polling place. You know what democracy is, because for democracy to work for us all, we all have to know how it works. It's more than listening. It's about having a two-way conversation, actually. Without wanting to give another plug to Mackay Regional Council, they've actually done this really well. They did the YOL 1000, Youth Out Loud 1000 conversations. So it wasn't just consultation.
Jesus.
It wasn't just listening. It was actually having conversations with 1,000 young people in the community and then acting on it, doing something with what those young people were in dialogue about, one of which was, we actually want to be part of the decisions that you're making because they affect us. So perhaps we could have a youth council, and so that's what led Mackay to lead this new model, the Young Mayors model. But it's reshaping the model of how we engage young people at that local level.
And it's understanding that there is momentum in there. So we know this from volunteering. People are nice per se. People want to do the right thing. People want to view themselves through a good lens, so to speak. But you need to push them a bit at the beginning. And so once you ask people, hey, you want to volunteer here? All of a sudden, once you do this, you end up with heaps more volunteers than when you just put up a sign that goes like, anyone?
You actually need to invite them in.
Yeah, yes. and you need to tap people on the shoulder. It's a much more proactive approach. And so you cannot be just passive. It's really, I always urge local government, people in arts and culture and volunteering, you need to be proactive in getting people through the door. And from then on, you can actually create momentum and quite nice things can happen once you got the bit of momentum going.
And it's not just about getting them through the door and getting them to participate, it's then also making sure that representation around the council chamber and in all of our decision-making fora is actually representative as well, because there are so many of the artefacts of local government and the systems and the structures and the way that we're established that kind of play to the old ways of thinking that can work as disincentives for young people to get involved.
Can I just add something to that? With native title being in existence, the Native Title Act since 1993, there's actually nowhere in Australia that you can go to formally learn anything about native title, not even in universities or TAFE or anywhere that we've written a curriculum. We teach our young people But the issue I've got is teaching young people and then they get no certification for the courses that they're doing with us. It's never been certified in this country. We've written a curriculum, like I said, and the government just hasn't certified any qualifications whatsoever that you can get in Australia to learn about native title.
So how do you fix that?
Well, I think it costs a lot of money. So we've gone to philanthropists now, but the issue you have with, because government eyes just glaze over at all levels, because it's cost a lot of money to certify a course, or they'll tell you that BHP certifies its own courses, and we think, yeah, that's because it's BHP. They've got money to pay for certain courses. We haven't got any money, so we go to philanthropists, but the issue with philanthropists is they always want you to do what they want you to do because they've got the money. So we're just trying to sort of hope that Australia will mature as a nation. And having said that, and I'll finish on this, I promise, everyone talks about migrants coming to this country. Other than First Nations people, you're all migrants to this country. I don't know why they discriminate about the ones that came before or the ones that came after or the ones that are going to come in the future to us. And most people that came didn't really want to come here and do any harm. They were either sent here or didn't want to. But let me say, the more recent ones seem to be more proactive about trying to get to understand us. And the artwork that's exported in Australia, majority of Australia's exported art, visual art, is First Nations art. So there you go.
So Kate, I know you had something to add there.
Oh, just tying back to Talia's point there, one of my favourite experiences in an election line at the last federal election was standing behind a group of young people, and one of them turned to their mates and said, I haven't decided who to vote for. And rather than saying, oh, you should vote for this, I'm voting for this party, you should too, they said, have you had a look, oh, let's get up I can't remember the name of it, the ABC, come on, someone help me out. They're like, yeah.
Compass.
Thank you. Look at the compass, do the questions, duck into the bathroom, go and do the questions in the bathroom. Gross. And the fact that that was their response gave me real hope that it wasn't, you should pick the same team as us. It was that you should do a bit of work.
Make an informed decision.
The values that embodies, and the fact that Compass exists and that they knew that they could recommend it gives me real hope for that active participation in democracy.
But you actually have to practice it too. And one of the reasons the electoral commissions, for example, are so involved in our program is because the hardest demographic to reach, one of the hardest demographics for them to reach is 18 to 21-year-olds. Because, you turn 18, you get your letter in the mail, you don't quite know what it means. But if you've practiced it between the ages of 11 to 17, by the time you turn 18, you are immediately making an informed vote.
Yeah, and so Simon, for you as a demographer, is it encouraging to hear, this younger people being so active and proactive in what we're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. So lots of things that Australia is doing right. So you want to proactively seek out young people. I'm a big fan of compulsory voting. When I first came here, I thought it was stupid, to be honest, because I got like, why can't you pressure people to vote? It felt weird because I come from a country, Germany, where you don't need to do this, but it does moderate. We discussed this earlier today as well. It moderates the radical vote. Because the crazies will always vote for their crazy. They're highly motivated.
Of course, we use the term affectionately.
Yeah, and I do this, it's a purely technical term here. But the more radicalized you are, the more motivated you are, the more likely you'll rock up on the day. And so the silent majority, if the crazies claim to be speaking for the silent majority, they don't. The silent majority actually rocks up and votes relatively middle-of-the-road kind of stuff. It's always the same. And so with the political system that we have in place, we do actually soften the risk to be taken over by radical forces, which is something, with a German history background, I think this is very good that we have this in place. Yeah? And it's even stuff like our superannuation system. That ensures that each of us, we put a gun to everyone's head and say 10%, 12% of your money goes into this bucket, but it means in retirement, you have your own retirement bucket. Nobody can take this away from you. Whereas in Germany or in most systems, there's one big bucket, there's a formula, you put that much in, you get that much out, but this bucket can be changed. And so that then creates situations where either you're not sure how much you can get, that's insecurity in retirement, but mostly once there's a treasurer with a calculator who tells you, hey guys, we actually need to freeze pension payouts, that opens the door for radical parties. That is an easy in for a crazy to say, hey, whatever, I'll give you all of that. So, cool. And we don't have that. So we actually, the boring, calm political environment sometimes doesn't feel that boring and calm, but that is actually a helpful thing. So we want to create a bit of boredom and stability in there. Yeah? It's a bit weird that we have only 3-year terms. I'm never quite sure where this came from, but you want to ensure that we can think longer term. And that's always what I push for, is widen your time horizon. Backwards, forwards, think in longer terms, and all of a sudden things become a bit clearer. Right? And this is why I'm a big fan of the intergenerational report, because in the media circus, it means 1 day per year, everyone is forced to look 40 years into the future. I do this every day, but I think it's helpful if you do this a bit more frequently. And when you make big expenses in your local government areas, I know that you are not the guys throwing around that much money compared to states and federals, but always look ahead. What does it mean 5, 10, 50, 100 years into the future? And then all of a sudden, certain policies make much more or much less sense.
Talia, sorry, Ingrid, I will come to you now. We'll get that right. And so we mentioned, or Simon mentioned, in 10 years' time, there's an extra 10 million people here in Australia.
Four.
So how do we get those people out into the regional areas?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was contemplating that and looking at the graph, and one of the biggest focus for regional councils, and in fact the NT, and a plug for the NT, fantastic place to live. If you want that experience of what real Australia is like on the coal front, then I would say come to us, because we have this amazing work-life balance. And one of the things that we've been working on to try and attract people into our regional towns, or indeed to our capital city of Darwin, is to look at our livability. And again, that's something that we've been pushing out through our own website, and we're looking at that as a local government association, is how can we best tell people about why it's so good to live here in all of our livability. You can still afford homes, you can still afford to raise families you can still afford to travel round into wide open spaces, you can still afford to go camping, and those are the kind of things that we can afford. What we can't compete with, based on a ratepayer dollar, is that huge salary that I guess that the younger generation is expecting. So it really was poignant, and you really hit home with that. We can offer so much add-on, but we can't compete, and we will never be able to compete. So we're looking for a segment of that community. We've got a really diverse community because of the way the rules are around visas. We have so many international communities emerging in our town, which creates a different set of dynamics and a different way to engage and create communities and create involvement. We welcome that, but everything is not without its challenges, except that front and foremost to us has always been, how can we attract people to the NT? How can we get you back?
And so, Rebecca, I would imagine for you this influx of people is at the opposite end for you. How are you going to jam them all in? And do you want to attract those people into your area for fear of overpopulation?
It's an interesting discussion, and certainly one that's going on in Victoria at the moment around discussion around the state government's new sort of strategic land use planning framework called Plan Victoria, and they're certainly looking at pivoting from population growth would go to the outer suburbs and the growth, what has been traditionally called the growth, referred to as the growth areas, and moving to a 70-30 split to actually have new populations going where infrastructure currently exists, which is the inner and middle inner and middle rings, and it is generating quite a lot of discussion and debate around some of the opportunities and the challenges associated with that, particularly around housing crisis and all of those sorts of things. But I think, you know, certainly from the perspective of local government as an employer and as a local employer, we're seeing really great opportunities in terms of how we are continuing to sort of grow and evolve our organisation to respond to some of that change. And I really think that there are some great opportunities for us to sell the prospect of local government as an employer. And certainly the young people in my organisation aren't telling me that cash is king, that money is important. What they're telling me is that actually the most important thing for them is work-life balance, that having that capacity around, they're really worried around mental health and making sure that there is opportunity for them to establish that sort of balance in their life. And they're also telling me that we should be thinking about initiatives and projects and things that reward short service, not just long service. So thinking about, well, how do we reward, if we want to keep people in our organisation for, say, 3 years, how do we reward that rather than perhaps making people stay for 7 years to achieve their long service leave? So I think it's, you know, the opportunity about rethinking some of those systems and processes that actually are typical of local government.
A couple of wonderful things you mentioned there. So the young folks, and when I say young, I roughly mean pre-family formation, because who cares about age? Age is just a number, you know, all of this. But the idea is your behavior changes once you have kids. So before you have kids, you can be pretty, you know, independent. You have enough money to pay for your things. Yes, you might not swim in it, but you get by. And then all of a sudden, once you have kids, money becomes a more important factor, because all of a sudden you have real costs, and you go, Jesus, these people eat, the little ones and whatever, and everything costs money. But so with the young workers, before they have families, it is actually not about money, because they earn enough money to get by, whatever. And so then you need to have a different narrative compared to if you want to have, you know, family moms and dads into the workforce.
Yeah, can I just say that's what we're trying to bring the whole family. So also on a really good point that you raised, and something that we've introduced into our organisation is our wellness strategy. So we've really had to stop, take a look and work out how we can keep our employees by developing all those extra add-ons that just come as part of what we offer, including things like mental health training, you know, traditional gym membership discounts, but crafternoons, you know, just some fun thing that we can just add value, and everyone gets to just have that little relax, admittedly on our time. But it has really benefited us by being able to show that if we just take a little bit more care, we can actually attract some good people. So I'm sure there's lots of other councils doing other amazing things like that, but
There is.
you know, just a heads up.
Yeah. Okay, so sadly we're coming towards the end of our discussion. Talia, I know once we break, you have a special presentation in the Torrens room. Do you want to just give us 60 seconds on what we can expect to learn with you just after 11?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not in the program. We invited ourselves and went a little bit rogue, hired a room during the meal break. So bring some food. We'll be kicking off sort of as soon as most people come into the room, just after 11. And it's a presentation from Young Mayors, but also YLAB, the social enterprise that was imagined by the Foundation for Young Australians, which I think a few people heard about yesterday as well. So YLAB work with governments and young people to bridge the gap, to work out how they can work better together to create better futures. And YLAB are working with the Young Mayors program to support councils in the pre-work stage before you join the Young Mayors program and say, yep, let's have a youth council. What do you need to do to lay the foundation, to look at the system, to make sure that the system is inviting young people in a way that is going to work best for them. So we're going to talk through some of those tips for meaningfully engaging young people in that session in the Torrens room just after 11.
Amazing. Invite yourself. I love that. That's beautiful. Okay, so Simon, we'll leave the final word to you. With a demographics or through a demographics lens, is there hope Is there hope?
Absolutely, there's always hope. If you compare just the demographic base growth setup of Australia, we buffer the aging of the population through migration. We can continue to do this for quite a while. So demographically speaking, that's easy. We then just need to fix the housing crisis. How hard can that be?
How hard can that?
All right, so Kate, Talia, Ingrid, Rebecca and Valerie, please thank our very special guests up here. And once again, a massive big round of applause for Simon as well. That was so entertaining. It was beautiful.